My parents told me I destroyed my brother's future by buying a $2 million villa in cash. So when they tried to steal my identity to even the playing field, I gave them one choice: sign the papers or go to prison. My name is Nathan. I am 25 years old, and 3 months ago, I did something that most people my age, and honestly, most people in general, only see in filtered Instagram feeds or high-budget architecture magazines. I bought a villa by the coast. Not a rental, not a generous gift from a distant relative, and certainly not an inheritance. I bought it. It's a sleek, white, ultra-modern masterpiece of glass and concrete that clings to the cliffs like it grew there. It has these massive floor-to-ceiling windows that swallow the horizon, making the Pacific Ocean feel like a living painting in my living room. On the quiet mornings, when the mist is still clinging to the salt water, I sit out on the mahogany deck with a cup of black coffee. The silence is heavy and sweet, yet I still find myself looking at the deed in my drawer, just to make sure I'm not hallucinating. I paid for it outright. No predatory mortgage, no, "Hey Dad, can you co-sign this?" phone calls, and absolutely zero debt. It was just me, a battered secondhand laptop with a flickering screen, and nearly a decade of the kind of relentless, soul-crushing grind that makes your eyes bleed at 4 a.m. But if you ask my parents, they won't tell you they're proud. They won't tell you about the kid who worked 3 jobs to stay afloat. Instead, they'll look you dead in the eye and tell you that I have effectively destroyed my younger brother's confidence and ruined his entire future by being excessive. Let me back up, because I know exactly how that sounds. It sounds like the opening monologue of one of those trashy, overacted soap operas my mom watches late at night while nursing a glass of cheap Chardonnay. But I swear on everything I own, this isn't a story where I'm the villain or everyone else is a caricature of evil. At least, it didn't start that way. And I think that's the part that stings the most: the slow, quiet erosion of a family. I was born into what the world calls a decent middle-class family. We were the poster children for mediocrity. My dad was a regional sales manager for a furniture company, a man who measured his life in quarterly quotas and beige polyester sofas. My mom stayed at home, keeping the gears of our domestic life grinding. Along with my little brother, Zach, we lived in a modest 3-bedroom house just outside of town. The aesthetic was perpetual maintenance. The grass was always a few inches too tall. The family sedan made a rhythmic, haunting clicking noise every time you turned left. And Christmas was always a delicate balancing act of credit card limits. We weren't starving, but we were always one major engine failure away from a crisis. From the moment I could count change, I knew I was on my own. My parents weren't bad per se, but they had this hands-off approach that felt more like neglect masked as building character. My dad was a disciple of the old school. The boys don't cry, just fix the sink and shut up variety of fatherhood. And my mom? Well, she was a kind woman, but she lived and breathed for Zach. Zach was born when I was 7, and he immediately became her sunshine child. He was the miracle, the little prince, the golden boy who could do no wrong. I used to joke, though the joke had a bitter edge, that if the house ever caught fire, Mom would sprint back into the flames to save Zach's first-grade finger paintings before she even checked to see if I'd made it out the front door. The shift was instantaneous. If I brought home a B+ on a chemistry final after pulling an all-nighter, Dad would glance at it and say, "Good, but why wasn't it an A? Aim higher, Nathan." But when Zach scribbled a haphazard purple line on the living room wallpaper with a permanent marker and called it a rocket ship, Mom would practically weep with joy, calling it a prophetic sign of his burgeoning creative genius. When I turned 16 and landed my first job stacking heavy crates at a grocery store until my back ached, Dad just gave a curt grunt of approval. When Zach joined a recreational soccer team at age 10, the entire family drove 2 hours in that clicking car to watch him sit on the bench for 90 minutes. We had a pizza party afterward to celebrate his spirit. I learned early to keep my head down and my mouth shut. I worked. I saved every copper cent. I studied until the library lights flickered off. I knew the college fund conversation was a fantasy. My parents made that crystal clear during my junior year of high school. "We're just trying to keep the roof over our heads, Nathan," Dad had said, not looking up from his spreadsheet. "You're a smart kid. You'll figure it out." So I did. I fought my way into a state university with a handful of scholarships that barely covered tuition. I lived in a damp, cramped basement apartment an hour away from campus, sharing the living space with two guys who thought cleaning was optional. I survived on a diet of pure caffeine, 25-cent microwave noodles, and a level of sheer, unadulterated stubbornness that bordered on a mental health crisis. I took on tutoring gigs, did freelance graphic design for overseas clients at 3 a.m., and worked the graveyard shift at a local print shop. Meanwhile, Zach was coasting through high school like a wind-up toy on a polished marble floor. He wasn't a bad kid. He wasn't out getting arrested or starting fights. He was just aggressively average. He had no drive, no spark, no hunger. He got bored if a task took more than 20 minutes. He quit the track team, quit the band, and quit every hobby he ever started, always armed with a convenient excuse about how the teacher didn't get him or how it wasn't his vibe. And my parents? They cheered for his bravery in exploring so many different paths, constantly reassuring him that he'd find his calling eventually. When I finally graduated, there was no party, no balloons, no cake. I didn't even tell my parents I'd finished until a week after the ceremony. When I mentioned it over the phone, they told me they couldn't have made it anyway. Zach had a long overdue dentist appointment that day. I'd love to say I was heartbroken, but honestly, I didn't expect anything else. I hit the ground running, landing a junior role at a tiny tech startup. The pay was insulting, but I saw the potential. I worked while my roommates played League of Legends. I worked while the world went on vacation. I learned the market. I invested every spare dollar into high-risk, high-reward ventures, and I climbed that corporate ladder with my fingernails. And Zach? Zach decided to take a gap year to find himself. That year bled into 2 years of doing absolutely nothing. He spent his days gaming until the sun came up, sleeping until noon, and occasionally deigning to work a part-time shift at the local movie theater only when Mom begged him to help pay for his own gas. He was a 20-year-old man-child being curated by parents who refused to let him fail, while they looked at my success not as a triumph, but as an uncomfortable reminder of everything their golden boy wasn't. By the time I hit 24, the relentless grind finally started to pay off in a way that felt tangible. I'd launched my own web design firm. Just me and one of my closest friends from the basement apartment days, fueled by cheap energy drinks and an obsessive need to prove the world wrong. We hustled until our eyes were bloodshot, pulling 80-hour weeks, and eventually we caught a few massive breaks with high-end contracts. I didn't celebrate by buying a Rolex or a sports car. I lived like a monk. I moved into a clean, minimalist little condo and kept driving the same dented silver Corolla I'd had since my sophomore year of college. I poured every single cent back into the business, calculated in cold, because I knew nobody was coming to catch me if I fell. Then came the villa. After 2 grueling years of meticulous planning, aggressive saving, and sleepless nights, I finally signed the deed. At first, I didn't tell a soul. It wasn't about being secretive. It was about the sheer, overwhelming surreality of it all. I felt like I had somehow glitched the system, like I'd accidentally broken into a parallel dimension where the kid who ate dry cereal for dinner actually made it. I remember walking through those vast, echoing white halls for the first time, my footsteps clicking on the marble, and just whispering to the empty air, "You did it, man. You actually freaking did it." Eventually, the high of the moment got to me. I posted a single photo on my private social media. It wasn't flashy or braggy. No hustle culture captions or posing in front of the glass. It was just the view from my deck at dusk. The sun dipping below the liquid gold of the horizon, a single glass of red wine on the table, and the shadow of the railing. I captioned it simply, "New Beginnings." The backlash was almost instantaneous. Within 2 hours, my phone started vibrating violently against the table. It was Mom. Not a text, not a like, but a direct, full-on phone call. My heart sank because in our family, a phone call usually meant someone was in the hospital or someone needed money. "Nathan," she said the moment I picked up. Her voice wasn't warm. It was clipped, icy, and devoid of any hello or "How are you?" "Is that your place?" she asked. I hesitated, the salt air suddenly feeling heavy in my lungs. "Yeah." I just closed on it last week. Silence. The kind of silence that feels like a physical weight pressing against your chest. Then she let out a sharp, jagged breath. And you didn't think to tell your family? Your own flesh and blood? I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. It's been a crazy week, Mom. I've been buried in paperwork and... She cut me off with a sound that was half scoff, half sob. Then she said something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. You know, Zach saw that post. He hasn't gotten out of bed since he saw it. He's devastated, Nathan. He feels like a total failure because of you. I blinked, staring out at the ocean, completely bewildered. What? Mom, what are you even talking about? He's been trying so hard lately. Her voice rose an octave, trembling with that familiar, fierce protectiveness she only ever reserved for him. He's been looking for jobs, trying to get his life back on track, and then you just go and shove your success in everyone's face. Don't you think that's a little insensitive? Don't you think about anyone but yourself? It hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I hadn't even mentioned Zach's name. I hadn't even thought about him when I took that photo. It wasn't a weapon. It was a milestone. It wasn't about him. It was about me finally breathing after a decade of drowning. I didn't shove anything in anyone's face, I said, my voice shaking as I tried to maintain some semblance of calm. I shared a photo of something I worked my ass off for. I'm proud of this. Mom let out a bitter, mocking laugh. Well, you should have considered how it would affect your brother. He's already under so much pressure, Nathan, and now he feels completely worthless compared to you. He's your brother. His mental health should matter more to you than some fancy house. I could feel my pulse thudding in my ears, a rhythmic drumming of pure, unadulterated resentment. I wanted to scream. I wanted to roar at her. Where was this empathy when I was working 60-hour weeks just to pay for a degree you wouldn't help with? Where was this concern for pressure when I was shivering in a basement while Zach was playing Call of Duty until 4 a.m. and you were praising him for taking time to relax his mind? But I didn't. I just swallowed the rage and said, I'm sorry Zach is feeling that way, but I've worked for everything I have. That's when she dropped the hammer. You didn't get there alone, Nathan. Don't you dare forget who raised you. Don't forget who kept food on the table and made sacrifices for you. You owe this family. Something snapped inside me. It wasn't just the blatant guilt tripping. It was the realization that, in their eyes, I wasn't a son who had succeeded. I was just a resource they hadn't tapped into yet. It was the culmination of years of being the invisible child, the one who was smart enough to figure it out, while the golden boy got the glory and the safety net. I wanted to say something I'd regret, something that would burn every bridge back to that house. Instead, I just muttered, I need to go, and hung up. I figured that would be it. A blow-up, a period of icy silence, maybe a few months of staying away from the family group chat. Honestly, I would have welcomed the peace, but I was dead wrong. That phone call wasn't the end of the argument. It was just the first pebble sliding down the mountain before the entire cliffside collapsed. For 2 weeks, it was radio silence. No texts from Dad, no check-ins, not even a passive-aggressive comment on my Facebook from some distant aunt. It was eerily quiet, but it was the most peaceful 14 days of my life. I focused on my work. I sat on my deck and watched the waves. I even hosted a few small, low-key dinners for my business partners and mentors. For the first time, I felt like I was living my life without that heavy, invisible anchor of family obligation dragging behind me. But in my family, peace is never just peace. It's the eye of the hurricane. The storm officially broke with a message from Zach. It was short, blunt, and devoid of any warmth or punctuation. Hey, heard you got a house, LOL. I stared at that screen for a long time, the LOL feeling like a mocking grin. I knew exactly what was coming next, and I knew it wasn't going to be a congratulation. Zach always had a specific way of typing, lazy, lowercase, and laden with a lack of effort that felt intentional. But this time, the tone was jarringly off. It felt like he was desperately trying to play it cool, masking a deep-seated bitterness behind that LOL. I stared at the screen for a moment, my thumb hovering over the glass, before typing back a neutral, non-confrontational response. Yeah, just closed last week. It's been a long journey. He left me on read. The blue checkmarks sat there like two tiny daggers. The very next afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was my Aunt Sarah, my dad's younger sister from Oregon. We usually only exchanged pleasantries during the holidays, so a call out of the blue was a massive red flag. "Nate," she started, her voice laced with a mix of concern and hesitation. "I had to call you. Your mother has been ringing everyone in the family. She's telling people some pretty intense things." I felt a cold pit form in my stomach. "Like what, Sarah?" "She's saying you've changed. That you're acting like you're above the rest of the family now because of that house. She told your Uncle Jim that you're just showing off to make everyone else feel small." I was floored. I sank into one of my new kitchen chairs, the leather cool against my skin. "What?" "No, that's not true at all. I haven't even seen them." "It gets worse, Nate. She also told the family that you're flat out refusing to help Zach. She said you told him to his face that he was on his own and that his struggle wasn't your problem." I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. A wave of hot, righteous indignation surged through me. "I never said that. I literally haven't spoken a single word to Zach since he sent me a 3-word text yesterday. That is a complete lie." Sarah sighed heavily on the other end. I figured the math wasn't adding up. I told her she was overreacting, but, well, you know how she gets when it involves your brother. He's her whole world, and she thinks you're attacking his pride. I thanked her for the heads up, hung up, and just sat there in the silence of my beautiful, empty villa. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Why was she doing this? I hadn't cut anyone off. I hadn't rubbed my success in anyone's face. I hadn't posted photos of exotic cars, or popped bottles on a yacht, or acted like some nouveau riche influencer. I had posted a picture of a sunset. A sunset. It became chillingly clear that this wasn't about a social media post. This was about the fact that I had dared to achieve something they never expected of me. I had achieved a level of stability and luxury that Zach wasn't even close to touching. And in their warped family dynamic, my success was seen as a direct threat to the narrative that Zach was the special one. Still, I didn't strike back. I didn't go on a rant on Facebook. I didn't call up every relative to plead my case or expose my mother's lies. I chose to believe that if I just stayed quiet, the drama would lose its oxygen. I thought they'd eventually cool down and realize how psychotic they were being. Then came the annual family barbecue. Every summer, like clockwork, my parents hosted this massive ordeal in their backyard. It was the quintessential suburban nightmare. Plastic lawn chairs sinking into the turf, the smell of cheap charcoal, burgers that were always charred on the outside and gray on the inside, and dozens of people pretending they enjoyed being out oasis in 90-degree. I hadn't attended in 3 years, blaming work, life, and the general desire to avoid the passive-aggressive comments about how poor Zach just needs a little more time to find his spark. I wasn't going to go this year either, but Aunt Sarah called me again. "You should show up, Nate, just for an hour. Set the record straight without saying a word. Let people see for themselves that you're still the same guy, not the arrogant monster your mom is painting you to be." Against my better judgment, I agreed. I didn't drive a flashy rental or show up in a designer suit. I pulled into their driveway in my 10-year-old Corolla, wearing a simple button-down and jeans. I even stopped to buy a decent bottle of wine as a host gift, trying to be as humble and low-key as humanly possible. The moment I stepped into the backyard, the atmosphere shifted. The air felt thick with judgment. I felt the stares, heard the sudden drop in volume as conversations turned into hushed murmurs. It was like walking into a room full of people who had just been talking about me. Because they had. I caught a woman from my mom's church whispering to her friend, "Oh, look, here comes Mr. Villa himself." Another cousin muttered loud enough for me to hear, "I guess we know who won the sibling lottery, huh?" I forced a smile, nodding and saying hi to uncles and distant relatives I barely recognized. I kept it light, kept it polite, and tried to ignore the invisible "kick me" sign they'd pinned to my back. Then I saw Zach. He was slumped in the shade of the old oak tree, wearing oversized sunglasses with headphones draped around his neck like a shield. He was nursing a lukewarm soda, looking like he was at a music festival he didn't want to be at. His hair was long, greasy, and he had this unkempt, shaggy look that screamed, "I haven't left my room in weeks." I walked over, trying to bridge the gap. "Hey," I said. He gave me a tiny wave, more of a dismissive flick of his wrist, really. He didn't even look up. "Sup? How have you been, man?" He shrugged, his eyes glued to his phone screen. "Whatever, fine." I waited, hoping for a shred of genuine connection. A congrats on the house, or even a how's work? Nothing. The silence was deafening. "Are you still looking for jobs?" I know it's a grind. Another shrug. "Market's garbage. No one's actually hiring. It's all a scam." I nodded slowly, trying to be supportive despite the cold shoulder. "Yeah, it's rough out there. Look, if you want me to take a look at your resume or put you in touch with some people I know, I'm not asking for your help," he snapped. The flat, icy tone stopped me mid-sentence. It wasn't even hot anger. It was a cold, deep-seated resentment that felt like a wall of lead. "Okay," I said after a long, awkward beat. "Just offering." He turned back to his phone, effectively dismissing me from his presence. I started to turn away, feeling the sting of rejection. But that's when my mother's voice rang out. She was standing by the grill, her voice projected at a volume intended for the entire backyard to hear. "Zach, sweetheart," she called out, her eyes locked onto mine with a terrifying artificial brightness. "Don't you worry about a thing. Some people like to use their money to buy respect because they have nothing else, but you've got something way more valuable than a house. You've got a real heart." The yard went silent. All eyes were on me. I turned around, paralyzed by a mixture of shock and sheer, unadulterated disbelief. My mother was standing by the grease-stained grill, a spatula gripped in her hand like a scepter, her eyes burning with a self-righteous fire as she stared me down in front of everyone. The air in the backyard turned brittle. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I just blinked, my throat tight, and retreated to a flimsy, half-broken folding chair someone had shoved into the grass. But the poison had already been released into the water. For the next hour, I was a ghost at my own family's table. I sat there as the whispers swirled around me like a toxic mist. I caught the jagged edges of backhanded comments and jokes that felt like paper cuts. One uncle, a man who hadn't asked me a single question about my life in 5 years, leaned over and asked if I was planning to retire early and leave the rest of the family to rot in the real world. Another cousin laughed, suggesting that since I was so loaded, I should just loan Zach a few million so he could finally catch up and stop being the family's charity case. I lasted 90 minutes. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't make a scene. I just stood up, walked to my old Corolla, and drove away. Not a single person followed me to the driveway. No one called out. No one stopped me. The final straw, the one that broke the camel's back and set it on fire, came exactly 1 week later. I had just returned from a grueling business trip, a high-stakes client pitch that involved 2 red-eye flights and 4 hours of sleep. I was exhausted, my brain felt like lead, and all I wanted was to crawl into my own bed. But waiting in my mailbox was a plain, handwritten envelope with no return address. Inside was a typed letter. No signature, no salutation, no "Dear Nathan." It just went straight for the jugular. "You should be ashamed of yourself. While your brother is drowning and struggling to piece his life together, you are out here flaunting your wealth like a trophy. Your success means absolutely nothing if it comes at the cost of your family's unity. Real men lift others up. They don't leave them behind in the dust." I stared at the paper, my fingers trembling so violently the letter rattled. Who the hell sent this? My parents? Zach? Some self-appointed moral guardian from my mom's church group? I had no idea, but the intent was clear. Someone wanted me to feel like the villain in my own success story. And for a fleeting, dark moment, it worked. I sat on the edge of my pristine, king-sized bed, clutching that hateful piece of paper, and I actually asked myself, am I being selfish? Am I the bad guy here? Then the memories flooded back, sharp and cold. I remembered every single night I spent hunched over textbooks until my eyes burned. I remembered every double shift at the print shop, every missed party, every moment of paralyzing self-doubt I faced while Zach was sleeping until noon. I remembered the deafening silence on my graduation day, the total absence of any emotional or financial safety net, and the countless times I was told, "You're fine, you'll figure it out," while Zach was being spoon-fed every possible excuse for his own laziness. No, I wasn't being selfish. I was surviving. I was the architect of a life they told me I'd have to build alone. I wasn't asking them for a standing ovation. I just wanted to live my life without being dragged back into their insecurity-laced circus. But they couldn't let it go. They couldn't let me just be. 2 weeks after that anonymous letter, a text lit up my phone. It was from Zach. "Hey, I was thinking it would be cool if I could move into the villa with you just for a bit. Need a fresh start. Can help with groceries or whatever." I sat there in total disbelief. No apology for the cold shoulder at the barbecue. No reflection on the lies Mom had spread. No acknowledgement of the years of distance. Just a casual, "Hey, can I live in your luxury seaside house for free?" I didn't reply. My silence was my answer. 2 days later, the second wave hit. A text from Mom. "You're being cruel, Nathan. All your brother wants is a chance to breathe. Why are you acting like he's a stranger? You owe him that much." I didn't respond to that one either. I was done being the family's punching bag. Then the phone rang. It was Dad. That was the final boss of family guilt. He rarely got involved in the domestic drama unless Mom badgered him into playing the role of the stern mediator. His voice was calm, measured, but heavy with that paternal authority he used to shut down arguments. "Son," he said, "I know you've worked hard. No one is denying that. But this family has been through a lot lately. Zach's been lost, Nathan. He's drifting. Moving in with you might be exactly what he needs to get back on track. A change of scenery, some inspiration from his big brother." "Dad," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I haven't even had time to settle in yet. This is my first real home. I'm not turning my sanctuary into a rehab center for Zach's identity crisis." There was a long, painful pause on the other end. "You're being incredibly harsh, Nathan." "I'm being honest," I countered. He sighed, a sound full of weary disappointment. "We just thought—" "No," I interrupted. "You assumed? None of you asked me how I was doing. None of you even congratulated me on the house without adding a but at the end. All I've heard since I bought this place is how my success is somehow a personal attack on Zach. How I'm responsible for his feelings and his future. I'm not." The silence stretched out, becoming a chasm between us. Then he muttered the words that finally severed the tie. "We're just disappointed. We expected better from you." That was it. That was the moment the last thread snapped. It wasn't an explosion. It was just a sharp, quiet sentence meant to cut me down to size. And it did. But not in the way he intended. In that moment, I realized something terrifying but completely liberating. I wasn't their son anymore. Not in the way a son should be. I was a benchmark, a living reminder of everything Zach hadn't done. As long as I kept growing, they would keep trying to shrink me in their minds just to make room for Zach's excuses. That night, I poured a glass of wine and sat out on my deck, watching the black waves crash violently against the rocks below. The moon was a cold, bright orb in the sky, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt the weight of their expectations slide off my shoulders and sink into the sea. I was done waiting for the approval of people who only loved me when I was struggling as much as they were. I was done being the villain in a story I didn't write. I took a sip of the wine, looked out at the infinite horizon, and for the first time, the villa finally felt like mine. But the betrayal that followed didn't just hurt, it hit me with the kinetic force of a freight train, crushing whatever microscopic sliver of hope I had left for a reconciliation. It didn't start with a scream or a dramatic confrontation. It started with my own name staring back at me from a bank account I had never authorized, never signed for, and never even knew existed. The realization dropped into my stomach like a lead anchor. It began with a mundane, automated email from my primary bank, the kind you usually skim and delete. "Thank you for updating your joint account details," it read. My blood turned to ice. At first, my brain tried to protect me. I told myself it was a phishing scam, a clever piece of malware designed to steal my login. I checked the sender's address. It was legitimate. I manually typed the bank's URL into my browser, my fingers fumbling over the keys, and logged into my secure portal. There it was, a brand new checking account opened a mere 48 hours prior. It bore my full legal name, and right underneath it, listed as a co-owner with full withdrawal privileges: Zachary. I froze, the air in my office suddenly feeling too thin to breathe. My first instinct was identity theft from some faceless hacker in a dark room halfway across the world. My second thought was, how? I am meticulous. I'm the kind of person who uses encrypted password managers, rotates complex login credentials every quarter, and never leaves physical mail sitting in the box for more than 10 minutes. I am paranoid because I had to be. I called the bank immediately. After 45 minutes of being trapped in the purgatory of hold music and being bounced between 3 different departments, I finally reached a senior representative. She explained calmly, with a professional tone that bordered on apologetic, that the account had been opened in person at a local branch just a few miles from my parents' house. "Both parties were present," she said, her voice echoing in the hollow silence of my room. "IDs were verified for both applicants." "No," I said, my voice low and vibrating with a terrifying kind of stillness. "That's impossible. I was out of the state. I was in San Diego on a business trip 2 days ago. I have the flight receipts, the GPS logs, and a hotel bill to prove I wasn't within 500 miles of that branch." There was a long, heavy hesitation on her end. That is very strange, Mr. Miller. We're going to have to escalate this to our fraud department. You will likely need to file a formal police report." I didn't wait. I filed the report, demanded every scrap of documentation they had, and drove 3 hours straight to the specific branch where the crime had occurred. I sat in a cramped, fluorescent-lit cubicle with the branch manager, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Then he pulled up the security footage. There he was, Zach. He was standing at the teller counter, flashing that same easy, charming smile he used whenever he wanted Mom to bake him a cake or Dad to lend him the car. He was wearing my old college hoodie, the one I'd left in my childhood bedroom 3 years ago. In his hand, he held my expired driver's license, an old ID I thought I'd lost during a move. He looked the teller right in the eye and pretended to be me. My pulse spiked so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I sat there watching my own brother commit actual, literal felony bank fraud using my identity as a shield. "Can I have a copy of this footage?" I asked, my voice a jagged whisper. "We'll need legal authorization and a subpoena for that, sir," the manager replied, his face a mask of pity. I stepped outside and leaned against the hood of my car, gasping for air and trying with every fiber of my being not to scream at the top of my lungs. This wasn't just another family betrayal. This wasn't a snide comment at a barbecue or a passive-aggressive text. This was a premeditated, calculated, paper-trailed crime. This was my brother attempting to siphon off my life's work by chaining my credit to his incompetence. I drove home in a deafening silence. That night, sleep was an impossibility. I paced the length of my deck, the moon casting long, distorted shadows on the floor. I began to write. I documented every call, every threatening message from my mother, every guilt-tripping lecture from my father. It all lined up with sickening clarity now. The slow burn pressure campaign, the moving in requests, the accusations of selfishness, it was never about family unity or heart. It was a coordinated strike on my bank account. They thought I'd be too ashamed, too confused, or too burdened by family loyalty to actually fight back. They thought my success made me a soft target, but they didn't realize that I had hit my emotional rock bottom months ago. It was that quiet, freezing kind of bottom where you finally accept that the people who were supposed to be your biggest fans are actually your most dangerous critics. The kind of bottom where you realize that holidays aren't celebrations, they're negotiations. This fraud? This was just the final confirmation I needed to stop feeling guilty. I filed the police report. I had no choice. My accountant made it clear. Leaving my name on that account, even for a single week, opened me up to catastrophic liability. If Zach overdrafted by 10 grand or used the account for some shady get-rich-quick transfer, the law would come for me. When the officer took my statement, there was no tremor in my voice. He used an expired ID. He forged my signature. I want to press charges, full extent of the law. A week passed. Then 2. Silence. I heard nothing from my family. No what's going on. No panicked phone calls. No one tried to defend Zach. It was as if they knew the hammer was falling and decided to preemptively cut me off to save their own skins. It hurt significantly more than I expected it to. The truth is, I never wanted to burn the bridges. I just didn't want to be the one standing on them when they collapsed. The formal investigation took about a month. During that period, I went completely radio silent. I deleted their contacts, blocked their numbers, and locked down my credit reports like a fortress. And yet, there were still nights where I'd sit on my deck, the salt air stinging my eyes, thinking about how the hell it came to this. I remembered a time, years ago, when I used to daydream about making it. In those fantasies, I'd come home for Christmas with a car full of expensive gifts. I imagined offering to pay for a new roof for my parents or helping Zach buy his first house so he could finally have a fresh start. I wanted to be the hero. I wanted to be the one who saved them. But you can't save people who view your survival as an insult to their own failures. I used to have this vivid, recurring daydream back when I was pulling double shifts and living on caffeine. In that dream, I'd finally make it. I'd pull into my parents' driveway in a nice car, the trunk overflowing with thoughtful, expensive gifts. We'd all be gathered around the dinner table, the air thick with the smell of a home-cooked meal and genuine warmth. My dad would raise a toast to my hard work, and my mom would look at me with eyes that finally said, "I'm so proud of you, Nathan." I wanted to be the hero who came back to fix the roof, pay off the debts, and buy Zach his first real car so he could finally start his life. But I had finally finished climbing that mountain. And when I reached the summit and turned around, they weren't there waiting with open arms. They were still at the very bottom, necks craned upwards, squinting with resentment at the view I had earned. They didn't want to join me. They wanted to pull me back down into the mud so they wouldn't feel so small. That realization didn't just hurt, it broke something fundamental inside me. But in that shattered space, something else began to take root. A cold, hard resolve, and a clarity I didn't even know I was missing. I stopped the endless cycle of trying to justify my existence to them. I stopped writing those sprawling, desperate drafts of text messages to my mother that I never had the courage to send. I stopped playing out hypothetical reunions in my head where everyone suddenly apologized and lived happily ever after. Instead, I poured every ounce of my soul into rebuilding. Not just the business, that was the easy part, but my actual self. I started therapy. For the first time in my 25 years, I sat across from someone who wasn't trying to weaponize guilt against me, or fix me into a more convenient shape, or remind me of some sacred debt I supposedly owed for the crime of being born. She just listened. She helped me put names to the ghosts that had been haunting me. Emotional parentification, golden child syndrome, guilt-based control. Once I had the vocabulary, the spells they cast over me started to lose their power. I started reconnecting with the people who actually mattered. Old friends who had cheered for me from the sidelines for years without ever asking for a handout. I took a solo trip to Portugal, wandering through cobblestone streets where nobody knew my name or my obligations. I learned to cook actual meals that didn't come out of a microwave. I started hosting small, intimate dinners at the villa where the conversation was about music, philosophy, and laughter. Never about who was winning the success lottery. Slowly, the crushing weight in my chest began to lift. My company thrived, landing a massive contract with a European firm that changed everything. I hired a project manager, scaled back from 70-hour weeks to something resembling a human schedule, and started mentoring tech students from backgrounds just like mine. Kids who grew up in houses where figure it out was the only parenting they ever received. Through it all, I stayed silent about my family. I didn't go on a scorched earth campaign. I didn't post rants or expose them to the world. I just lived. I thought the silence was a shield. But the universe has a twisted sense of timing. Just as I was beginning to feel like a normal person again, a letter arrived. It was real mail. Floral stationery, handwritten in that loopy, elegant cursive that I recognized instantly. There was no return address, but I didn't need one. It was from Mom. There was no Dear Nathan, no Love, Mom, just a jagged strike of ink across the page. Zach made a mistake. He was desperate. You should have come to us before involving the police. Families don't do this to each other. You've broken this family. I read it once, then twice. I set it down on the marble counter of my kitchen and just stared at it. And then, finally, I let myself feel it. It wasn't the white-hot rage I expected. It wasn't even the deep, hollow sadness of the past. It was relief, pure, unadulterated relief. That letter was the final piece of evidence. Even after the felony fraud, the forged signatures, and the years of emotional neglect, they still refused to see me as a human being. To them, I was just a shadow, an extension of Zach's failures. There was no apology for the crime, only blame for the consequences. No remorse, only entitlement. I hadn't broken the family. I had simply stopped being the one who allowed himself to be broken by the family. What followed wasn't a cinematic revenge plot. I didn't need a courtroom drama to feel whole. I just needed my boundaries, my distance, and my peace. But a storm was still brewing on the horizon. While I had found my stillness, Zach was still drowning in his own resentment, and he wasn't going down without a fight. The next time I saw him, he wasn't alone. He didn't even have the decency to knock. I was working in my home office upstairs, the sun glinting off the ocean, when I saw them through the window. Zach was standing at my front gate, looking incredibly uncomfortable in a charcoal blazer that was clearly a size too large, his shoulders hunched. Next to him stood a man in a stiff, expensive blue suit, clutching a leather briefcase and checking his watch with the bored impatience of a man about to ruin someone's afternoon. I didn't rush down. I stood by the glass, watching their silhouettes against the brilliant blue of the sea. A weird, hollow ache settled in my chest, the kind of feeling you get when you realize a nightmare is bleeding into your waking life. Then, the intercom buzzed, the sound grating and harsh in the quiet room. "Hey, Nathan." Zach's voice crackled through the speaker, thin and shaky. "We need to talk. I brought someone who can explain everything." He didn't sound sorry. He didn't even sound angry. He sounded rehearsed, like a puppet reciting lines he'd practiced 100 times in front of a mirror. They weren't here to apologize for the fraud. They were here for the house. I pressed the intercom button, my finger lingering on the cold plastic. "This isn't a good time, Zach," I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. There was a long, static-filled hesitation. "Look, Nate, it's important," he stammered. I could hear the forced confidence in his voice, the kind of shaky bravado he always used when he was about to ask for something he hadn't earned. "It's not what you think. It's business." Business. I almost let out a sharp, hysterical laugh right there. But I had been preparing for a moment like this, ever since that fraudulent bank account appeared like a ghost in my portal. I'd been running worst-case scenarios in the back of my mind during my morning coffee. I hadn't predicted a man in a stiff suit at my front gate, but I had learned a vital lesson from building my firm. When someone demands a meeting without warning, they aren't there to congratulate you. They're either selling you a lie or planning to take a piece of your life. I buzzed them in anyway, not out of some lingering sense of brotherly love, but because I wanted eyes on them. I wanted evidence. I wanted to see the look on their faces when they realized the soft target had grown teeth. They walked up the winding stone path, the crunch of gravel under their shoes echoing against the white walls of the villa. I met them outside on the driveway, the salt wind whipping my hair. The man in the blue suit stepped forward with a practiced, toothy grin that didn't reach his eyes and handed me a heavy card. Jacob Feldman. estate law, and family arbitration. Zach stood a half step behind him, looking like a nervous middle schooler outside the principal's office. He was visibly fidgeting, his hands buried deep in the pockets of that ill-fitting blazer, his gaze darting everywhere except at me. I didn't invite them inside. I didn't offer water. I led them to the shaded patio area overlooking the cliffside and gestured coldly toward 2 wrought iron chairs. I remained standing, leaning against a stone pillar towering over the conversation. Jacob opened a sleek leather folder, his movements fluid and rehearsed. He began with a cheery, artificial tone that made my skin crawl. "Nathan, thank you so much for your time. I'm here today on behalf of Mr. Zachary." My brother. I interrupted flatly, the words cutting through his legal jargon like a blade. "You can just say my brother. We don't need the formalities." Jacob smiled as if I'd just cracked a clever joke at a cocktail party. "Of course. Your brother has come to me with some deeply felt concerns regarding a verbal agreement made between you two, specifically regarding the shared ownership of assets accumulated during your joint upbringing. He believes there is significant cause to consider a petition for equitable distribution under—" I held up my hand, palm out. "Stop. Just stop." Jacob blinked, his rehearsed flow momentarily interrupted. "I beg your pardon?" I turned my focus entirely to Zach, ignoring the shark in the blue suit. "Is this your idea, Zach? Is this really what we're doing now?" Zach glanced at the ground, then back at me, his eyes glassy and defensive. "It's not what it sounds like, Nate. I'm not trying to take anything. I just think I deserve something. You had all these advantages, man. I was never really given a shot. And now you've got this villa, the business, everything. And I'm out here struggling. What advantages, Zach?" My voice rose, the volume unplanned but the intensity intentional. "Tell me. I'm dying to know about this secret head start I supposedly had." "You had school paid for," he snapped back, his voice cracking. "Not by mom and dad, but by scholarships. That's privilege, Nathan. You got a car, you got opportunities, you got out while I was stuck." I stared at him in pure, unadulterated disbelief. "Zach, I bought that car for $1,200 off a guy on Craigslist, and I spent 3 weekends rebuilding the radiator myself while you were at soccer camp. I worked 4 jobs, tutoring, printing, designing, and stocking shelves, to get through college while you slept until noon every day of high school. My privilege was that I stopped sleeping so I could survive." He looked wounded, as if my facts were a personal betrayal. "You're missing the point. It's about the family dynamic." "No," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are." Jacob cleared his throat, sensing the emotional gravity was shifting away from his script. "If I may, Nathan, there is a legal precedent here. A shared upbringing can sometimes be argued as grounds for an implied partnership, especially in cases where one sibling benefited disproportionately from intangible family resources, such as emotional support or indirect financial advantage." I almost laughed out loud. "Let me get this straight. Your legal angle is that because I succeeded with less support, I somehow owe more to the person who had everything handed to him?" Jacob raised his hands, palms open in a gesture of fake peace. "This doesn't have to be adversarial. We're just seeking a mediation, a conversation." "And what exactly," I said slowly, savoring the silence that followed, "is Zach hoping to get out of this conversation?" Zach looked away, staring at the waves. Jacob didn't miss a beat. "A 25% stake in your design firm or an equivalent cash buyout. Additionally, a short-term housing allowance, seeing as you have more than enough room here to support him while the transition is worked out." The air went dead still. I stared at both of them, the audacity of the demand ringing in the air like a discordant bell. Behind me, the ocean kept crashing against the rocks, unbothered by the petty greed of men. A light breeze moved through the palm trees, the only sound in the suffocating silence. I took a deep breath, and then I laughed. It wasn't a bitter laugh or even an angry one. It was a short, stunned bark of pure, crystalline disbelief. "Wow," I said, shaking my head. "You really don't get it, do you?" Zach looked like he wanted to speak, his mouth twitching, but I held up a single finger. "No, you don't talk now. You've said more than enough." I turned my gaze to Jacob, whose tooth grin was beginning to fade. "This meeting is over. If you attempt even a single filing of legal action, I have a mountain of documentation waiting for you. I have witnesses, a full forensic timeline of every instance where Zach attempted to access my personal accounts." I stepped closer to the lawyer, my shadow falling over his leather folder. "If you want to play the long game, Jacob, be my guest. But I will countersue for damages, defamation, and emotional harassment. I will make sure this equitable distribution ends with your client in a courtroom, not a villa." Jacob's mouth opened, then snapped shut like a dry book. He looked at Zach, then back at me, his professional confidence evaporating. Zach looked like a kid caught stealing from a cookie jar, his face pale and his bravado completely shattered. "Nate, please," Zach whispered, finally looking me in the eye. "Can we just talk like brothers, Nate?" Zach's voice was thin, a pathetic, wavering sound that barely carried over the sound of the tide. "I didn't mean for it to get to this point. I swear." I stared at him, really looked at him, and for a split second, I saw the little boy who used to draw rockets on the wall. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who had tried to steal my identity to fund his own stagnation. "Neither did I, Zach," I said, my voice as level as the horizon. "But here we are. You brought the lawyer, you brought the threats, you chose this path." I walked them both to the gate. There was no screaming, no cinematic blow-up, and no tears. Just a cold iron steel in my spine that I hadn't known was there. When the gate clicked shut and I watched their car disappear down the winding coastal road, I went back to the patio and sat in the silence for hours watching the shadows of the palm trees stretch across the stone. Then I picked up my phone. I didn't call my corporate attorney. I called someone I hadn't spoken to since we were roommates in a cramped, moldy dorm. Nico. Back in college, Nico was a legend. Brilliant, chaotic, and genuinely terrifying if you ended up on his bad side. He had majored in digital security while I was grinding through design, and now he ran a boutique cybersecurity firm that handled the kind of high-level threats people usually only see in movies. He was the guy political campaigns and massive corporations called when they needed to be invisible. Every once in a while, if the story was juicy enough, he'd step in to help an old friend. I laid out the basics. The fraud, the expired ID, the equitable distribution nonsense. On the other end of the line, Nico let out a long, low whistle. "Damn, Nate. Your brother's got guts. They're stupid, suicidal guts, but guts nonetheless. What do you need? You want me to build a wall around you?" "Better," I replied, my eyes hardening. "I want you to build a mirror maze. I want them to spend the rest of their lives chasing their own reflections while I disappear." "I like the way you think," Nico chuckled. "Let's get to work." Over the next few weeks, we went to war. Quietly. We reinforced every digital door and window I owned. Nico tracked suspicious IP addresses that had been relentlessly pinging my social media profiles and my company's backend. We set up real-time alerts for my credit score and social security number. Nico even managed to unearth an old recovery email linked to an ancient PayPal account I'd completely forgotten about. One Zach apparently hadn't. "He's been trying to brute force your passwords for years, man," Nico told me, his voice serious. "This wasn't a snap decision. He's been laying the groundwork to bleed you dry since before you even bought that villa." That rattled me to my core, but it also crystallized my resolve. I pulled the original registration documents for my firm. I updated the entire corporate structure, rewrote the bylaws, and quietly migrated every single asset under a new parent LLC, one that Zach and my parents didn't even know existed. Different name, different bank, different state. I called in every favor I had with real estate clients and offloaded my investment properties into a separate holding company. It wasn't illegal, it was just incredibly smart. By the time I was done, every penny I had ever earned was effectively untouchable. It was a digital fortress. And yet, I still didn't attack. Not yet. The game had shifted. Zach still thought this was about fairness and inheritance. He still believed he was entitled to a seat at my table just because we shared a bloodline. He He didn't realize I'd outgrown the table entirely. Then, the opportunity I didn't see coming arrived. My father called. He didn't lead with a lecture or a plea for money. He sounded tired. He told me he was worried about Mom, that she was spiraling, losing sleep, and wandering the house muttering about how she should have handled things differently. "She wants to talk, Nathan," he said softly. "She wants to fix things. She misses you." I let the silence hang for a few beats. "Then she can come to me," I finally said. "But not alone." "What do you mean?" I looked out over the ocean, the water a deep, bruising purple in the twilight. "I want the whole family here. Mom, you, and Zach. No lawyers, no surprise guests, no hidden agendas. One conversation, one table, and everything stays on the record." Dad hesitated, his breath hitching. "I don't know if that's a good idea, son." "It's not," I said. "But it's the only one I'm offering. Take it or leave it." He hung up without saying goodbye. The next day, a text appeared. "Sunday, 3 p.m., we'll be there." I looked at the message, then at the sprawling, quiet villa around me. The stage was set. The microphones were professionally hidden in the centerpieces. The cameras were positioned to catch every flinch, every lie, and every manipulation. The script was still unwritten, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being directed. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closure. It was about making sure that after years of being silenced by guilt and sacrifice, my story would finally be told in its entirety. They arrived 10 minutes early, a rare feat that signaled their desperation. Mom was dressed as if she were headed to a Sunday service. A soft pastel sweater, her favorite gold necklace, and hair styled with painful precision. She carried a covered tray of food, a peace offering wrapped in tinfoil. Dad walked behind her, his posture stiff and uncomfortable. He was wearing the same charcoal jacket he'd worn to my college graduation, the one they never actually showed up for. Zach trailed behind them both, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, a nervous, flickering smile plastered on his face. He looked like he expected a cozy heart-to-heart over coffee and cookies. He had no idea he was walking into a deposition. I opened the door and said nothing. I didn't offer a hug, a welcome home, or even a polite nod. I simply held the heavy glass door open just long enough for them to shuffle in, their footsteps echoing awkwardly in the high-ceilinged foyer. Mom tried to press the covered tray into my hands. The smell of cheap vanilla and burnt sugar wafted off it. Cookies. A peace offering from a woman who had spent the last month dragging my name through the mud. I didn't take it. I simply motioned toward the dining area and said, "Let's sit." They obeyed like children called to the principal's office. The dining table was a massive, solid slab of reclaimed oak, one of the very first custom pieces I'd splurged on when I moved in. It felt grounded and immovable, much like I did in that moment. I took my seat at the head of the table. On the opposite side, I had arranged 3 chairs in a row. In front of them, I had placed 3 bottles of water, 3 ceramic mugs, and a stack of napkins. No snacks, no warmth, no domestic distractions. Just cold, empty space and a silence so heavy, it felt like it was ringing. I sat down, clasping my hands on the wood. Zach cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. "This feels a little intense, don't you think?" He tried to joke, his voice cracking at the end. No one laughed. The air stayed frozen. Mom placed her tray of cookies down with a soft clink and folded her hands over her lap, her knuckles white. "Nathan, sweetheart, we just want to talk. As a family. Can we do that?" I nodded once, my expression unreadable. "Good. Because I have a few things I need to say, and I would appreciate it if no one interrupted me until I am completely finished." Dad opened his mouth to protest, his brow furrowed in that old, familiar way, but he caught the look in my eyes and stopped himself. Mom gave a frantic, tiny nod. "Of course, sweetheart. Whatever you need." I reached beneath the table and clicked a small remote hidden in my palm. Inside the decorative, hand-carved fruit bowl at the center of the table, a tiny, professional-grade audio recorder turned on. The light was invisible to them, but I felt the click in my soul. "Zach," I started, turning my gaze to him first. He looked smaller in person, less like a cunning fraudster and more like a boy playing dress-up in a blazer. "You used my expired ID to impersonate me. You walked into a bank and opened an account in my name. You linked it to my old financial data and attempted to use my credit history to secure loans. Do not lie to me." He squirmed, his eyes darting to the cookies. It wasn't. "Don't," I cut him off, my voice dropping an octave. "I have the high-definition security footage. I have the digital bank logs. I have a formal police report. I am not asking you if you did it. I am telling you that I know." Mom let out a sharp, horrified gasp. Dad looked at Zach with a sudden, jagged sharpness. "Zachary, is that true?" "I didn't mean for it to be a big deal," Zach snapped, his defensiveness finally bubbling over. "I just needed a start. I thought we could work something out." "But you did it," I said flatly. "You did it, and you got caught. And instead of coming to me with an apology, you hired a lawyer and tried to stake a legal claim on my company, my villa, and my hard-earned money. You tried to sue me for the privilege of being successful." "I thought you'd be reasonable," he shouted, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. "I thought you'd see that I've been struggling while you're living in a goddamn palace." "You thought I was weak," I corrected him. "You thought I wouldn't fight back because I'm the reliable one. You expected me to do what I've always done, keep my mouth shut, be the mature one, and carry the weight of your failures while you played the victim for Mom and Dad." His eyes burned with a pathetic kind of rage. "I've been struggling, Nathan. You have no idea what it's like to be stuck." "So did I said, leaning in. "I struggled for 10 years. I just didn't ask the rest of the world to bleed for my mistakes." The room became suffocatingly heavy. I turned my attention to my mother. She looked fragile, her lower lip trembling. "And you? You knew. Maybe you didn't know the specifics of the fraud, but you knew he was hunting me. You fed that fire. You told the whole family I was cruel. You told our relatives I had abandoned you when you were the ones who never even showed up for my graduation. I just wanted to protect him," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "He's your brother, Nathan. I have to look out for him." "No," I said, the words feeling like ice. "You wanted to protect the idea of him. The golden child you built up in your head to justify your own choices. You spent your entire life cushioning his every fall, making sure he never felt the ground, all while telling me I had to fly on my own or crash. You didn't protect him, you crippled him." "You don't understand how hard it's been for us," she wailed. "I understand perfectly," I replied, "because I lived it. I lived the neglect, the silence, and the lack of support, and I made it out alone. I'm the only reason I am standing here today." Dad finally spoke, his voice gravelly and low. "What do you want from us, Nathan? Why are we here?" "I want accountability," I said, reaching into a sleek black folder and pulling out a stack of legal documents. "I want this behavior to stop, permanently. I want you to admit out loud what happened. And I want Zach to sign this document stating he relinquishes any and all future claims, legal, equitable, or otherwise, on my business, my home, or my financial holdings. It is a total and absolute waiver." Zach scoffed, looking at the papers like they were poison. "Are you serious right now? You want me to sign away my rights?" "As serious as a heart attack," I said. "You already tried to come for me once. I am not giving you a second shot at my life." Mom pushed the tray of cookies toward me again, her eyes wide and brimming with tears. "Nathan, please, we're family. Don't do this. Don't make it so cold." I leaned forward until I was inches from her face. And where was that family when I was pulling 16-hour shifts just to keep the lights on? Where was the family when I had to eat plain white rice for 3 days straight because I couldn't afford a jar of sauce? Where was the family when I walked across that stage to get my degree and there wasn't a single person in the stands to clap for me? There was no answer, only the sound of Mom's quiet sobbing. "You don't get to weaponize blood ties only when it's convenient for your wallet," I continued, my voice steady and cold. You either act like family when it counts, or you forfeit the title. It's that simple. Zach folded his arms over his chest, a sneer forming on his lips. I'm not signing shit, Nathan. You can't make me. I didn't get angry. I actually smiled. A small, chilling expression that made him flinch. That's fine, Zach. Truly. He looked confused, his brow knitting together. What? Then why the hell are we here? I pulled out a slim black case and placed it on the table with a heavy thud. See, I've already protected everything. I've moved my assets, created holding companies in other states, and transferred all my intellectual property. What's left in my name that you can actually see? Just this house. You signing that paper doesn't actually protect me anymore. It's too late for that. I'm already safe. Then what's the point? He barked. I tilted my head, looking at him with something that felt like pity. The paper protects you. From what? I opened the black case and slid a thick manila envelope across the table. It hissed against the oak. Zach reached out with trembling fingers and pulled out the contents. His face didn't just go pale. He turned a sickly shade of gray. He blanched so hard I thought he might actually faint right there on my expensive rug. Inside the envelope were high-resolution, full-color printouts of the bank security footage. His face caught in a perfect, damning frame. There were copies of the official police report, time-stamped screenshots of his pathetic attempts to bypass my old PayPal security, and a detailed log of flagged attempts to reset my primary email passwords, all traced back to his personal devices. Zach's hands didn't just shake. They rattled the paper against the oak table. The silence in the room was absolute, save for the sound of his ragged, shallow breathing. I could have pressed full charges, I said, my voice echoing off the white walls with a chilling finality. Technically, I still can. This entire package is already sealed and ready to be couriered to the district attorney's office. Your lawyer knows exactly how serious this is, Zach. We're talking felony fraud, identity theft, and unauthorized access to protected financial accounts. This isn't a family squabble anymore. It's a prison sentence. Zach's head whipped around to our parents, his eyes wide and leaking pure, unadulterated panic. Mom? Dad? Say something. He's serious. Tell him he can't do this. But for the first time in 25 years, they said nothing. They sat there like statues of salt, staring at the evidence of their golden child's true nature. I stood up, the movement slow and deliberate. I loomed over the table, the shadow of my success finally eclipsing his excuses. Here's the deal. You sign the waiver, relinquishing every claim to my life. You sign it, I shred this file, and we never speak again. You walk away with your freedom, and I walk away with my peace. That is the only mercy you are ever getting from me. Zach's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He looked at the manila envelope, then at the legal waiver. The reality of the situation finally crashed down on him. He wasn't the protagonist of this story anymore. He was just a guy who had tried to rob his brother and lost. He snatched the pen off the table, his fingers trembling so hard it took him 3 tries to get a grip. He scribbled his name on the line, a jagged, messy signature, and shoved the paper back toward me with a look of pure loathing. I picked it up, inspected the signature with the clinical coldness of a stranger, and nodded. I folded the document and slid it into my personal folder. Then I reached for the manila envelope, the one containing the power to ruin his life, and walked over to the fireplace. I calmly dropped the envelope into the hearth and struck a single match. We all stood there, a fractured family gathered around a dying flame, watching as the evidence of his betrayal curled, blackened, and turned to glowing embers. No one spoke. The only sound was the crackle of the paper and the distant, rhythmic pounding of the ocean against the cliffs. When the last scrap was nothing but gray ash, I turned back to them. This conversation is over, I said. Mom stood up, her face a mask of grief, her eyes red-rimmed and wet. She reached out a hand, a desperate, fluttering gesture. Nathan, please. We can fix this. We can go back to how it was. We're still your parents. I looked at her for a long, agonizing moment. I looked at the woman who had spent my life making sure I never felt truly seen unless I was being useful. "No," I said quietly, the words feeling like the closing of a heavy book. "You were just the people I came from." I walked to the front door and held it open. They left one by one. There were no hugs, no I love yous, no hollow promises to do better. There was just the sound of their footsteps on the stone path and the heavy, humid air of the afternoon. When the door finally clicked shut, I turned the deadbolt. The sound echoed through the villa, a sharp metallic period at the end of a very long sentence. And then, for the first time in my entire life, I exhaled. It was finally done. Not just the legal warfare or the financial shielding, but the emotional rot. The ghost of guilt that had haunted my every achievement, the crushing weight of unspoken pain, the years of walking on eggshells just so I wouldn't offend their mediocrity. It was all gone. I poured myself a glass of expensive bourbon, walked out onto the deck, and sat down as the sun began to bleed into the horizon. The sky was a bruised palette of orange, pink, and deep violet. I realized then that freedom doesn't always come from the zeros in your bank account or the square footage of your home. Sometimes, true freedom comes from finally letting go of the people who demand you fail, just so they can feel whole. They took my silence for weakness, but I had used that silence to build a fortress. And now, as the stars began to poke through the darkening sky, I finally had both: the silence and the last word. Thank you for staying with me until the end. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for my channel. Your support means everything. See you in the next one.